Since our debut more than 6 months ago, Arizona 360 has strived to bring analysis and context to issues impacting our state. In that time, immigration, education funding, the economy, and midterm elections often captured our attention. And this week, we revisit all 4 topics in a roundtable discussion with journalists who continue to follow how these issues affect communities across southern Arizona. Our panel includes Ernesto Portillo and Sarah Garrecht Gassen, both with the Arizona Daily Star, Dan Shearer from the Green Valley News, and the Tucson Sentinel's Dylan Smith. We have this social issue looming of asylum seekers. What we're seeing right now, the reaction, the outrage to the children being housed in facilities. Why didn't we see that in 2014 when we had hundreds of children being housed? We didn't see the same political outrage. Why is it?
I think there's a big difference between, there were protests in 2014. A lot of that was about the conditions people were being held in. And also at that point, many of the young people, the minors, were coming alone without their families. The difference now is we have family units coming, parent, kids, and they're being separated. The Trump administration has said we're going to let them know where they are, reunite them, but some of these kids are so young they don't even know their names, much less their last name or phone number or parents' names. So I think the difference is seeing parents and kids ripped apart is a different emotional dynamic that I think people can connect with in a much more human level. And there were protests in 2014. They were just about a different kind of facet of this.
One of the arguments, though, that we've heard as of late is if you and I committed some sort of crime, we have children with us, our children would be sent to a different place than we would. Why doesn't that hold the same weight these days?
Because, quite simply, if you come here and ask for asylum, you have not committed a crime in the least. That's a perfectly legal thing to do. Under the law, there's no requirement that you go to a port of entry and immediately say, hey, I want asylum. You can request asylum at any point up to having been here for a year, regardless of your immigration status.
But if you climb the fence and then you're caught and then you ask for asylum, you have committed a crime, and I think that's where a lot of this comes back to. The answer for me is that we're a humane nation, and that's what really separates us from a lot of people. We know that technically they committed a crime. Okay, I'm going to give you that. However, we also know why they climbed that wall. Either it's for economic reasons, they're pursuing the American dream, or there is a legitimate fear that they will be persecuted or killed in their country. We have to take the time to figure out which one it is.
Immigration attorneys we invited to our studio describe some of the existing hurdles to gaining legal residency in the U.S.
Anyone who has received DACA in the past or is currently a DACA recipient is able to file for an extension, or in some cases, if their DACA already expired, file another DACA petition that would potentially cover them. The problem with this is that it is essentially in limbo.
As we know, there are at least 21 million people who are here undocumented. So do we just ignore them? Do we create a program? What does this program look like? So we need to come up with a solution. It's cruel and unrealistic to just ignore like millions of people in the country, and they go in the shadows. They don't report crimes. They go underground. Some people are afraid to even go to the hospitals these days, and you know, that's not. I don't believe that's who we want to be as a nation.
Particularly if you come with children and you're separated from your children, it is an arduous process. However, if people are facing death back home, you're stuck between 2 very bad choices.
And here's another significant difference between 2014 and today. In 2014, you had a president and administration that was somewhat sympathetic. It sometimes bent over to be humane. Today's administration is an inhumane administration. It's an administration based on racist rhetoric. From the get-go, President Trump, when he announced his presidency, attacked Mexicans, accusing them of being rapists, being murderers. And we see continued incompetency in enacting this kind of policy of separating children. No one knows what's happening at the border. Multiple agencies who are supposed to be in charge are disorganized. So not only is it a racist policy where he took children, the administration did, held them as hostages so that he can leverage that to get his border wall.
I think racism and hatred, way too big a words for this. The man's a knucklehead. Let's just say it. He's a knucklehead on these types of things. It's a very complex issue. He doesn't understand it. He shows that over and over again. He's playing to his base.
And he's a racist, Dan. And by calling him a knucklehead,
no, that's a big term. That's a big term.
It's, just several letters.
He's made some racist statements. I'll say that doesn't make him a racist. I think he simply
What
doesn't
is that
understand
line
the-
then?
the-
What is that line? Do you get
I
like
agree.
25
I
racist
agree.
statements and then you're a racist? How do you, I mean, I understand what
Yeah.
you're saying,
Yeah.
and I understand what Ernesto is saying. How do you, I think part of the framework is that the view of the administration toward immigrants in general and Latino immigrants in particular in this circumstance is well documented.
In the last few months, members of the Trump administration have traveled to the border to reaffirm the president's policies, with pushback from some politicians and community leaders.
The Department of Interior is in support of Homeland Security on this issue. Clearly we're going to build a wall. Clearly the design yet is not finished.
The federal government has to make some decision as far as immigration reform. They have to work on that. And the citizens of the United States have to work on their drug problem.
If you cross the border illegally, we will prosecute you. And if you make a false immigration claim, we will prosecute you. The lawlessness has to end.
The thought of ripping children out of the arms of their moms is offensive and repugnant to everybody.
Every week, it seems, he says, this is a nation of law and order, and there are immigrants who have come through the right way, who have gone through the steps, through the process. My question is, why are we seeing so much, and right now, especially under this presidency?
I think part of it goes back to the 1980s and previously. The U.S. role in Central America and Latin America is so complicated and so created such upheaval in that part of the world. I honestly think we are seeing some of the result of that with the war on drugs, with the crime gangs coming in. Things in Central America and in some parts of Mexico are very desperate. It's not so much I want to go work for a couple seasons, send money to my family. These are people who are fleeing, and I think that is part of what the difference is.
Will Congress act? Will there be a wall? Will DACA go underwater because of all this?
Well, according to President Trump, who recently told the House, don't bother about passing legislation. Let's wait till November for the quote-unquote red wave. Again, he's playing politics here with immigration. Yes, he can wait for the midterm elections, but something has to be done now. If nothing else, some kind of Band-Aid solution. As for DACA, again, he's holding that hostage for the wall.
Then our conversation turned to the economy.
We need to also remember the retail and just the relationship that Arizona, specifically Tucson and southern Arizona, has with Mexico, Sonora. If you look at the mall parking lots, you see so many plates from Mexico. The influx of cash that relies on that relationship and tourism back and forth is something that speaks to the larger, do we feel comfortable coming into the United States to shop?
Will we see people say, politically, I'm just going to stay away from the U.S.?
I don't think we'll see people say politically, I'm done. I think the value that people get shopping on the side of the border will continue to pull people here from Mexico. But I also think that it's really important that we maintain that sort of person-to-person, marketplace-to-marketplace relationship, because people do vote with their pocketbooks at some point.
Right at the border, that's where a lot of the action is for a lot of us. And there really are two kinds of Mexican shoppers: the ones who come right over the border and buy their milk and eggs and then go back, and right now they're getting slammed because the peso is in such poor shape. And then those who have more money and have the permits to come into the country and shop at our malls and spend a lot of money. I don't see anything changing on either of those. Watching the peso is really what's going to be the determinant of how Arizona survives all this.
Despite the political theater that's ongoing, do we see fewer Americans heading south of the border for recreation, for leisure?
I don't. I recently was, my wife and I were recently in Vallarta, and it's full of Americans. And we frequently go to Rocky Point, Puerto Peñasco, and it is full of American tourists. Tourism is up in Mexico. Not just, of course, Americans. You have Canadians and Europeans, but Americans are going to Mexico.
Also at the start of the year, Arizonans earning minimum wage got a raise to $10.50 an hour. In Flagstaff, where voters approved a measure to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2021, we learned about an initiative to scale back those efforts.
What is the appropriate minimum wage for our city? Is it $15.50 an hour? Is it $14 an hour? Is it something in between?
We've largely not taken a stand on it, and we've just tried to figure out internally how we're going to adjust for it and work with the laws that got voted in.
Well, two things regarding the minimum wage specifically. We've talked to businesses before the implementation of the new minimum wage, and then during, and then a year after. And we're seeing that for businesses, they've taken quite a hit. They have cut back on hours. They've cut back on hours for employees. The compression, meaning the employees who are getting a little bit more than minimum wage have now demanded more. We're seeing a rise in prices as a result of it. We're not hearing a lot from the employees themselves, although they were very glad to get the bump. And it was significant for them, but I think that a lot of them do not anticipate being in minimum wage jobs for a long time, and therefore they appreciate this temporarily, but they are still looking to move on. But it has hurt businesses down where we are, and we've checked with a lot of them.
You know, economists often say that the economy is cyclical. We could have a recession coming up. Are we seeing any businesses that are saying, I don't know if I can sustain this, that maybe I need to start closing my doors because it's just not affordable? Anybody?
Well, we certainly are seeing some of tariff-related economic effects already. If you look at, well, you know, for the past couple of years, we've been waiting for housing construction to sort of kick off again in southern Arizona. It's starting to percolate a little bit. And now with the tariff on lumber coming from Canada, which is one of our largest suppliers of raw lumber, we've seen over the past several months the average price of the house nationally increased by $9,000.
In recent months, the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and an economist at the University of Arizona discussed similar concerns about the negative effects of more tariffs.
Well, essentially creates a system where an administration in Washington decides winners and losers across the globe, who gets to trade with us and who doesn't, who gets the advantages and who doesn't.
What happens to consumers here who want to buy a steel product, you know, whether it's a washing machine or an automobile, the prices go up, the selection goes down, and it's a backdoor tax increase on the American people.
We're going to see higher prices. We're going to see a loss of jobs. We cannot win a tariff war with the rest of the world, and we can see them ganging up on us right now, probably deservedly so. And it's unfortunate, but I think it's a little too early to trace a lot of that to this right now, but it is a foreshadowing of what is to come.
The Trump tax plan went through. People have a little bit more money in their paychecks. Are we seeing any sort of excitement over that?
I haven't seen any really solid Arizona numbers, but a poll just came out, a national poll about the tax plan, and it's continuing to trend unfavorably.
That's because people are looking down the road. This plan is going to take 9 years to roll out. Right now, 90% of the people who earn a paycheck right now are getting more money, so they're happy with their 20 extra bucks a week or whatever it is. So it sounds really good right now, but as you watch this roll out, in 9 years, if it stays in place, an estimated 70 million households will be worse off than they are under the old tax plan. There are changes in the IRS rules that are going to affect people later on, and it gets really complex.
Which we don't know about yet. We haven't had to fill out that paperwork, so we don't exactly know how it's going to hit us.
Our conversation turned to education funding, an issue that gained national attention in early spring with the Red for Ed movement and historic teacher walkouts. Educators we spoke to shared their frustrations with stagnant salaries.
We don't go into teaching for the money. Absolutely, we don't. However, we should still be able to live. We should still be able to have a livable wage.
I've spoken to teachers at other districts that are in collections for a dental bill that they cannot afford. Do they want to pay to have their dental work done, or they want to pay their rent?
My wife is also a teacher, and I have seen our ability to afford a decent standard of living erode continuously over the years.
This past couple months, we saw Red for Ed. The new hashtag is Remember in November. It seems every time there's an election, people get motivated to do something. Is this time going to be different?
I think, especially here in Arizona and in some of the other states where this was a big issue over the past school year, some of those folks were not previously all that politically engaged, and now they are. And that may make a big difference in getting their family and friends and neighbors to actually show up for once. I think that our biggest problem when it comes to elections is people who don't bother to participate in the least.
Governor Ducey started off the session saying there will be more money for education.
And even though we need more, we've got significant funds coming. So I think the idea that our K-12 education system is certainly not perfect, but we are seeing signs of progress.
And then we got more money, a lot more probably than he had initially anticipated.
So these raises were passed for our teachers. The plan was informed by our teachers, and we worked with the people in the education community because we believe in local control. And I don't think anyone wanted to see K-12 education being run out of the governor's office or the state legislature.
Will that save him come this next election?
The state of Arizona owes the schools about $2 billion. So if anybody is thinking and engaged, no. But most people are not thinking and engaged. I don't feel like he's going to really pay for it. The fact is we need to go back 10 years and say, okay, why did we start pulling back on education? Then why did we allow it to happen? And he wanted to escape some sort of embarrassment, which is why we got more money, I think, than we had anticipated. You see, he went from a 1% raise to, a 20% raise. And again,
the promise of a 20%.
Exactly. What a
it might
pittance.
happen at some point, sometime in the future.
If things
maybe.
are awesome in the future.
Exactly. But now the Red for Ed people, I think, are making a very big mistake with this Invest in Education Act, where they want to put all of this on the 1%. Education is the responsibility of 100% of the people who live in Arizona, and to throw it on the 1% is simply wrong. They might actually lose a lot more than they thought by pushing this if it actually ends up on the ballot.
Sarah, your position is unique over at the Star because you really get to filter through all those letters to the editor that come through. Are we seeing any discussion about people saying, I'm going to go away from public education, maybe private and charter for my child, because I know that's a guarantee?
It's been a very tumultuous end of the school year. I think people are talking about what's going to happen. Are things going to continue to be unsettled? But I also think once there is that big momentum and the fix, such as it is, I don't think we're going to see people say, I'm afraid there's going to be another walkout. I'm going to put my child in private education.
Within the Latino community, there's a different dynamic going on. I mean, the Latino community is much more dependent, I believe, on education than other communities because we are a younger community. We need education. We need for that upper mobility. And sadly, the defunding public education has come at a time when the Latino population increases. And I don't think it's a coincidence that as the Latino population increases, public funding for education goes down.
That is complete baloney. You're saying that white people don't rely on education to get ahead as much as Latinos do? And that correlation?
We need it far more. We need it far more.
That's
we don't have the PhDs, we don't have the MAs, we don't have the university graduates.
Well, you're hanging out with the wrong Latinos then, because I know a lot of them who do and are encouraging those behind them to do the same.
I'm hanging around a community that is struggling. I'm hanging around a community that is working hard. And many of them, unfortunately, are not legal residents or are not citizens, and so they cannot vote. And so they cannot vote for their self-interests, and their self-interests are then dependent on other voters.
All right, hold on though. So this, over the last few months, the University of Arizona took on a different role with engaging Hispanic students. Mm-hmm. Is that a step in the right direction?
What you're referring to is that University of Arizona is declared a Hispanic serving institution, meaning that 25% of its student enrollment is Latino. And that's a big step for this university because then it does mean that the university can focus a little bit more, not just on the Latino population, but on the overall diverse population that exists here at Arizona. And there are going to be some efforts to improve recruitment and retention of Latino students as well as staff and faculty.
All right, now, Dylan, the point you brought up earlier was that we all get excited about election time and we all think everyone's going to show up and then...
Especially among journalists and people who follow politics, yeah.
And then election day comes.
And only a bare majority of people can actually trouble themselves to cast a ballot.
And how many times do we hear it, and how many times do we as the media promote it? Year of the young voter, year of the woman voter, year of the Latino voter. It never, never, never happens. What needs to happen is that, let's go all the way back to high school. How does the system work? How does your local city council work? How does the state legislature work? They need to know how it works and who's in there representing them before they're really going to care. And by the way, their decisions affect you. This is why you need to know. So I would love to see an influx of people to the ballot box to change things. People just aren't that engaged.
We're talking about the November general election. We have a primary election coming up near the end of August, and The primary election, if the general election gets no love, the primary election is just standing by itself with an umbrella in the rain. It's just, but these are where the really important decisions happen at the primary. The people who get excited about the primary election are us, and people who are really, really devoted and dedicated voters who tend to be people motivated for one candidate, who are really powerfully identify with one candidate, and then you end up with the fringe. And I think it happens more on the right than it does on the left, because we're in Arizona and our lefties aren't all that lefty. This affects the quality of the candidates that we face in November, and there's so many state and local districts in Arizona that are always going to be Republican, or they're always going to be Democrat. And if you don't get a good candidate in there for the primary, you're going to end up with someone who's not fit for the job come November.
We continue to hear that Arizona is a conservative stronghold, will remain one, but then we also hear about this wave that's coming. The wave didn't come during the presidential election. Will things ever change in this state, or is it a conservative stronghold?
Oh, I think at some point it will change. Demographics will change the face of Arizona. Age, of course, is another factor, part of the demographic changes. Continuing influx of people from California or the Midwest, Latin America.
Well, we've seen in Green Valley that the hippies of the 60s are retiring and moving there, and so they have a different mindset. So Green Valley is old, white, and conservative. No. You got two of the three, but it's not so conservative anymore, and there are some very vocal and active left-leaning groups down there that are really making things happen. Maybe they're not going to change things at the legislature, but they are going to change some thought processes locally, and we have seen that over the last few years. And that really launched with Obama's election.
With open seats for the Senate and the House on the ballot this November, Arizona's midterms are among the nation's races to watch.
Arizona's representation in the Senate will change. What are we going to see?
Assuming John McCain does not come back to the Senate. We, of course, hope he does. I think we're going to see a big vacuum where Senator John McCain and Senator Jeff Flake have stood in terms of their knowledge and scope of understanding on immigration. Those two have been advocates for immigration reform. I haven't always agreed with them or thought they've done it the right way, but they certainly know more about it than someone from the interior of the country who it's more a hypothetical and they're dealing with stereotypes.
Not just on immigration, but on a number of other issues. Both of those senators have been very well informed. Whether you agree with them or not, their depth of expertise on, especially with McCain and defense, both of them on foreign trade, and another locally focused issue on water.
Water, for sure.
They've both been very, very involved in as policy leaders on that.
This is going to be a huge brain drain for Arizona, and we aren't going to get nearly the attention that we used to.
Is Arizona a swing state?
Potentially, sure. We talk about Arizona as being this conservative stronghold. It wasn't that long ago, 12, 15 years ago, when our majority of our congressional delegation in the House were Democrats. And we had a very popular and pretty powerful Democratic governor. There is, certainly if the Democrats pick the right candidates and run the right sort of campaign, they can win in Arizona. They've done it before, and the demographics seem to only trend in their favor over the years.
All right. My thanks to all of you. Very interesting and insightful. Thank you.